Hello, welcome back to this week's episode of the Let Me Ask You This podcast. I am your host, Evie Hepworth, and I'm so thankful you're here. I start every episode off by saying that, and I want to let you know I truly, in like the innermost parts of me, truly mean it. It means so much in how big the world is and all the different conversations you could be listening in on. It's not lost on me that you're listening to this one. So thank you. Truly, thank you. And in this week's episode, we have my friend Brittany Ross. Guys, first off, I have to start off by saying this is my public apology to my dear friend Brittany, because not only did I recorded a podcast literally 2 years ago when she wrote a book, and then we moved. It was a million things, and my computer crashed, and we lost that episode, that file, and I felt so bad. I'm like, Brittany gave me an hour of her life, and then it literally got lost. And then last year, literally a year and a half ago, I was like, Brittany, would you mind re-recording that episode? And she was like, absolutely. And you guys, that was a year and a half ago. This conversation that you're listening to, we recorded a year and a half ago, okay? Brittany has been so patient with me in getting this episode out. And I want you guys all, as you listen to this, know that she is the queen of patience, okay? So much life has been lived in between when we recorded this and what now that you're listening to it. And so I want to say thank you. Brittany is so patient. And Brittany is the author and wrote an incredible book called Dangerous Hope. And she was so gracious and incredible enough to ask me to write the foreword. And so when she released this book a little bit over a year and a half ago, she reached out to me and was like, Evie, would you write the foreword? And I'm telling you, the level of nerves that hit me when she asked that, I was like, I felt it's like this equal rushing feeling of nervous and honored, but like terrified, like, oh my gosh, and so I got the honor of writing the foreword in her book, which is just still to this day, I'm like, I can't believe I wrote someone's foreword. What the heck? This is wild to me. And so you can get her book, Dangerous Hope, on Amazon. I believe last I checked a couple days ago. I'm saying this right now on November, I think it's like the 7th. It was on super clearance on Amazon. So if you need a dose of hope, grab Brittany's book, Dangerous Hope. And in this episode, I do want to say, trigger warning, a lot of Brittany and I's story involves pregnancy loss, and a lot of her experience and all that she wrote through Dangerous Hope was reoccurring miscarriage, failed adoptions, a lot of traumatic, triggering things. And so if that's something you're walking through and it's a little bit tender of a spot, this is your warning. And Brittany is just one of those friends that she just wears her heart on her sleeve, and she is so unapologetic about it, and I'm so thankful. In my personal life, she has been a 911 phone call friend that I'm like, this is what's happening and I'm not okay, and she's been always there to be with me. And also, she's that girl in my corner that's like, write your book, Evie. And we've been friends for, gosh, way before, I guess before we adopted even. Our friendship started in the anti-human trafficking world, both doing nonprofit abolitionist work, and then it weaved into adoption, and then now she's just my girl for life. It's like funny. We've never even been together in person, and she knows some of my deepest secrets. Don't you love those friendships? And so we have a lot of history together and just walking through hard seasons together. And I can say now, years and years later, Brittany walks through things with Jesus. And so it's really, really beautiful. And her book and her life reflects that. And so even though we had this conversation literally a year and a half ago, I really know it's going to bless you. And I know that the Lord is releasing it at the perfect moment. And so without further ado, here is my conversation with my incredibly brave friend, Brittany Ross.
Tell me about you. For someone who does not know you, tell me all about you and tell me the story of how we became so close.
Okay, I'm Britt. How do people our age become so close and have never met each other in
trauma?
Yes, agree. And I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm an author, and I feel like you've said this at some point. We are women who wear many hats.
Yeah.
And I am both proud of that and terrified of that. And I founded a nonprofit, Mission 108. I'm certain that's one of the ways we became friends, because
that was the primary way.
The primary. And then God was like, and here's another, and here's another. And I'm so grateful for that. But the distance the amount of times that I have thought, oh, what I would give to just sit and
But
have coffee with you.
I know. I just remember thinking, this girl is everything. Like,
I
she
was
is.
good at faking it,
Oh,
which is in the book. I was a faker, and I lied to myself too because I
yeah,
was dying on the
yeah,
inside.
yeah.
But I did. I had a very, very, very Instagrammable life. I married a professional athlete and we traveled. I lived in 3 different states per year. And then when I wasn't moving for baseball, I was traveling internationally to do international development. And I just feel like God packed, I know you feel this way. I think in my 20s, God packed in an entire lifetime. And so I wrote a book about it. And it's called Dangerous Hope.
Yes. Okay. And so we'll, in the show notes, people, you guys can go buy her book. But tell me about the process of making kind of the broken pieces of your life into a book. Like, how do you decide A, what to write about, and B, like to express it where you feel like you're doing your life justice?
Yeah. Well, so that's a multifaceted question to answer. The
Yeah.
first part is like you and I were talking about before. I've never been a person, and I've always, always admired you for this. I've never been a person who is like, God said this to me. I'm like, did I say that to me? Did the enemy say that to me? Did God say that to
Mhm.
me? Did a friend say that to me? I don't
Yeah.
know. Like,
I don't trust
I
myself enough.
I don't trust myself enough, but once I do, I'm like, oh, wow, it was that simple. But the process and the internal dialogue and mental anguish that I put myself through to figure out the voice of God um, I mean, it's sort of my ongoing battle. I still feel like I've never perfected it. I've read every book, How to Understand God's Voice,
Yeah.
listened to every podcast. And to me, it's never been that clear. Not that
Mhm.
God's voice is not clear, it is whatever happens in my own mind, in my own trauma, that I'm like, I just don't know. But I knew there's been a couple things in my life that I knew for certain, and writing a book was one of them, which is interesting because I'm not like a professional writer. I didn't go to school to learn how to write. I
Mhm.
just know that God has given me the gift to express myself best through writing. I also think when God gives you a gift, simply and honestly, people reflect that back to you. Like, no one has ever told me I'm a good singer simply because, you know, it's just not there for me, and that's okay. But whenever I wrote, since the time I was a child, or whenever I wanted to express myself, I would write someone a letter. And then the feedback was like, wow, almost like you write better than you speak. And so I think that's one way that God has
Well, I
spoken to
think
me
people
clearly.
receive vulnerability and they just, even if the sentence wasn't structured beautifully, that
Yeah.
transcends off a page and that's what pierces the heart. And it's like, whoa. Uh,
Yes.
and you have a gift of that, especially on the topic in which you're vulnerable about, because so many women and, people in general don't want to talk about loss and trauma. And even like your opening book, I mean, the hook is like, oh gosh, like she's about to walk through something really hard, and obviously pregnancy loss and adoption and social justice. That's kind of our core mutual connections. But like, walk me through how you processed loss and allowed that to like keep your eyes like hope filled, because I think especially women, I mean, is it 1 in 4 that have pregnancy loss? It's like a crazy high, so quarter of
It was like 5 years ago. It might be different. It might be more
more,
now.
honestly. But like, walk me through how you can, I mean, because your book title, Dangerous Hope, like, how did you maintain
Yeah.
that type of hope when you had loss after loss
Yeah.
and you were moving? And like, when I think of your life, it's just like, it's so busy and all over the place. So, like, how
Yeah.
on earth did you find the time and intentionality to maintain hope with all of the things happening?
Yeah. I think hope, one of the things that hurt me the most was when well-intended people told me during my miscarriages, like just to keep having hope. And the amount of times that I tried to give up hope, like purposely give up hope, to test looking back, I'm like, wow, I was really testing God. Like, he had a lot of patience for me because I was like, I'm done. I will never do this again. And it was after my third miscarriage that I said to God, I will never be pregnant again. And if I do end up having a miscarriage, I will like refuse to leave the doctor's office until they surgically like fix this issue. I was so angry and I was so broken and I was so void of hope on my own will that I can look back now and see that like hope is not something that we have all because of ourselves. Hope is something that God literally implants into us. And that's why it's dangerous, is because we don't want it half the time, because it
100%.
puts us in the most vulnerable position we've ever been in, and it tests everything we've ever known. I was this like good Christian girl that really believed in, if you do all the right things and you make all the right choices, like bad things will not happen to you.
Which, just
And
side note, that theology is like, that will just drive me absolutely crazy, because we all fall into it. We think if you do the right thing, if you lean into him, then you will avoid pain. And it just drives me crazy, because the American gospel, we are surrounded by that thought. And that's why we can't suffer or maintain hope in hard
we
seasons.
can't suffer. And you'll read in the book that I don't realize that until I see it play out in human trafficking. And it was the girls in the safe home who had experienced more pain, more trauma, more darkness than I will ever know in my life. And they had more joy than I did. And it was the simple thought and question of, if God could rescue them, could God rescue me? And yes, like God did rescue them from human trafficking, but that wasn't my question. My question was like, they've been delivered of their trauma. They've been delivered of their pain. They still know a joy that I don't know. And how do I get that? How do I even attain that? Do I have to experience like the darkest of the dark? And so it was in my darkest season of life that I found hope, and hope had a name. Hope was not a verb or an action from my own hands or heart. It was like hope, Jesus meeting me in the darkest, worst bathroom floor moments you could even fathom.
Yeah, like, and Tim Keller is my favorite. I mean, Zach and I feel like pastor for the last decade, but his whole book on pain and suffering, it's basically like, that's why so many people even know Jesus, is because of the rock bottom. That's when, no matter where you come from,
Desperation.
people find themselves praying. People who don't even know Jesus, they're like, okay, somebody help. And then they experience Jesus and the hope that only he can offer. So let's just talk. I just want a small stint. I don't want the whole episode on, like pregnancy loss and stuff, but I love your perspective is really beautiful to me. So will you give viewers a small snippet into your experience with pregnancy loss? Even I already told everyone, but we recorded a full episode, and I'm like, but I remember you telling me all about your experience of just seeking answers within that brought clarity and like peace and stuff. So like walk us down that road of pregnancy loss, and then like even maybe a snippet of your story within adoption and how that all weaved together.
Yeah, so I had 3 miscarriages in a year, and I was a young, healthy woman who had every reason to believe in her fertility until I started bleeding, and I was 10 weeks pregnant. And even when at the first spot of blood, I was like in such denial, and I was just like, not me, no way. No history in my family that I knew of. And it wasn't until I was sitting in the emergency room and they couldn't find a heartbeat. And, I'm just begging this nurse why. And that question, why, of course, was loaded. I didn't mean like, why am I miscarrying? I meant I was asking her, I was like, you're the only human that could tell me, why would God let this happen to me? And she just said like, hey, we don't know the answer. And oftentimes it's not until your third miscarriage. She started speaking like insurance language to me. It's not until your third miscarriage or an infertility diagnosis that we even start to investigate that. And I knew right there I would have 3. Like I knew I would have 3
That was on your
miscarriages.
first one.
That was my first one. And I said to God, if you let that happen to me, I will walk away. And I knew, like I just knew. And any woman who's ever been pregnant and had a loss, that experience then creates within you, I call it this like thirst, like a hungry lion. I could see nothing else other than I then was just set on this path of I will do anything to become a mom. I don't care if it's at the expense of my own health, sanity, family, friendships.
100%.
And a lot of that, looking back, I'm like, I was a tornado. All I could see.
Temperature,
Yeah.
OPK tests, like
Buying
everything.
every single thing in my spare moments. And those people who've walked through infertility or miscarriage, it's like your whole life now is surrounded by your cycle. All you think about is, are you going to test positive, the 2-week wait, things like TTC, and you're just like,
Yes.
you speak a whole nother language. And then I was thrust into that world that I did not want to be in. And ultimately I was handed an infertility diagnosis, which I've heard they don't even give anymore, because because I don't know why.
Yeah.
It could be insurance. It could just be that they were handing it out a little too easily. But I was diagnosed, I think they called it unexplained recurrent miscarriage and infertility, which basically is like doctor talk for we have no idea what's going on with you.
Yeah.
I passed all the tests and nothing
Yeah.
was seemingly wrong. I think I had like a low egg count, but I was a 24-year-old, so I still had plenty of healthy eggs. And I then buried my fertility like Lazarus. It was dead, and I believed that doctor, and we were moving on. We actually, this is where you and I have things in common. We actually were secretly planning to adopt at the same time that I had a healthy pregnancy because I'm insane. And, as a 24-year-old who thinks she's invincible, I was like, we've got this. And when the healthy pregnancy never came, we decided, let's just go ahead and move forward with the adoption. We originally intended to do an international adoption, but because of my husband's job, I was considered a single mom, and that disqualified me from basically like every country except for 2. And I really wanted my husband to be a part of it. And so we pursued domestic adoption, and we were matched with a birth mom within weeks and walked through 7 months of a healthy pregnancy.
Everyone, she's like all over Instagram, traveling the world, and she told like 6 of us. She surprised all of us with this baby, and it was the most insane. It was amazing.
Yeah.
I still don't know how you pulled
on
that.
YouTube. You can watch the video of us surprising our family with a baby. And it's just my entire Instagram, all my friends and family had walked this journey of having hope. And we were so tired of disappointing people. So we kept the adoption a secret. I'm so happy we did. Like, I will forever be like, that was one of the best decisions I ever made, because it's implanted in me the joy that we got to deliver after years of heartache. And our first daughter is adopted. And so that adoption, that 7 months that we walked through with a birth mom, she ultimately had the baby and decided to parent. And we found out on Facebook, and I was crushed, and it was horrible. But 10 days later, we got a call that there was a healthy baby going to foster care, and did we want to be her parents? And we went to the hospital and picked her up and became parents that day.
Oh, chills.
Yeah.
Wild.
Yeah.
So then fast forward 2 years later.
Fast forward 13 months later, and I wake up and I'm like, I don't feel well.
Yeah.
And I've felt this before, and something is missing. And that was my period. And I then resurrected my so-called fertility, like Jesus resurrected Lazarus.
Okay, wait, hold on, rewind. So you wake up, you're feeling not good. And did you ever have the inkling, like maybe, just maybe, God would allow me to be pregnant? Or were you so shut off that you genuinely were shocked? Because I feel like I for sure suppress, but then when there's one spark, I'm like, it's still there. It's still like, it's so
I
like,
was so shut off. I thought I would. So we had made these like vision boards, and I thought my journey was going to be. I was like, I'm probably going to end up pregnant when I'm 40, and I'll just have one biological child after we've adopted 5.
Totally.
But I was at this point telling God, I do not want to get pregnant. Like, physically and emotionally, I was so ill. I was so not well that I was telling God, in order for me to give what I want to give to my daughter who's adopted, like, God, it is not best advised that I get pregnant, because I had just barely dug myself up out of this dark hole, and I was terrified to dive back into it if I lost another pregnancy. And God is just interesting. And I found out that I was pregnant, and I was certain. I had just gotten some. So at this point, I had decided that infertility for me meant that something was wrong. I had battled this idea of, like, is something wrong with me, or is something wrong? And I ultimately decided that there was nothing wrong with me. Like, I was still worthy. I was still a woman, even though I didn't have my fertility, but that perhaps infertility for me, and I know that this is not the case for everyone, meant that there was something going on inside of me, that I wasn't satisfied with the answers that doctors were giving me of, like, oh, this just happens. I felt like, no, this doesn't just happen unless there's a cause. Like, what has caused this? So I'd gone on this journey of trying to heal my hormones, but believing that at the end of that didn't mean that my fertility would turn back on. And I was told that by one of the best doctors in the world, that, like, once your fertility is quote unquote turned off, it doesn't turn back on.
Mm-hmm.
And so I believed that. I closed that chapter. I moved on. And I was actually really excited to not be in that, like, just like, control. Oh my gosh, I don't have to be controlled by this anymore. I'm a mom, and it feels the same. Like, I don't need biology to make me a mom. And so, that positive pregnancy test, it was hard because it wasn't what I wanted it to be. The feelings didn't happen the way that I wanted them to be. And then I carried so much guilt because I felt like I'm the symbol of hope for everyone who's been praying for me. And yet inside, I am terrified.
Okay. So insert the book, because the narrative you just shared is basically the outline of how you write. And like, how did you in all of that? So then you had a pretty hard pregnancy, right? It wasn't like,
I had panic attacks every day for 38 weeks.
So what
I
was
thought
that?
I was having heart attacks.
Is that a biological, like, that's just how your pregnancy was? Or do you think that was an internal, I have so much fear?
I don't know. I really hope that it was the fear, because if I were thinking about having another baby, and I'm like, if that is a physical manifestation of my pregnancies, that kind of stinks. But I hope that it was just the emotional place that I was in. I had never had panic attacks like that before. I literally went to my midwife several times, and I was like, I know this sounds silly, but I think I'm having a heart attack every single day at the same time.
Oh,
and
that's
she was
so
like,
hard.
that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And my therapist was the one who diagnosed me, and she said, you're having chemical panic attacks. And it was brutal. Like, I couldn't drive. I would, like, black out, so I couldn't drive when they would happen in the morning. And parenting was really hard, and
yeah, totally.
It's a really hard time in our marriage, and, like, fear doesn't obey the rules. And so even after that, like, I had never carried a pregnancy past 13 weeks. So I thought, oh, once 14 weeks hits, like, I'll be in the clear. And that didn't happen for me. I think I got more attached, and so then more fear came. And that's just the way that pregnancy went. And it was.
And did you find relief after you gave birth? Is it this lingering kind of peripheral thing?
It was so both for me. I had an intense amount of relief when she was here. But I then started to hear the stories that I told myself and the narratives that I believed of, like, I was always waiting for the other shoe to drop every day in parenting. Every phone calls were really triggering for me, because, like, when the doctor would call, so every time my phone rang, feel
Yeah.
despair, and I would notice, why do you feel despair from a phone call? And so I had
Mhm.
to like really work to rewire my brain. Any unknown number was just bad news, and it was
Yeah.
the hospital calling or
Yeah.
healthcare, and yeah, so
Honestly,
that was
what I hear with that is like your spirit is so hungry for hope, and it's just like, oh, maybe this phone call, maybe this pregnancy, maybe this adoption, maybe this, and it's these external things where you're just like, maybe this is will be my source and my tangible thing that I can hold that will be a source of hope. And like in your book, you always come back to the only thing that actually fuels us with hope is heaven. It is Jesus
yeah.
himself. It is the manifestation of a conversation with him that brings it. There's no synthetic other option that you cannot like manifest it. You cannot like, there's no counter, and so it's just interesting how, especially you and your personality, you're not afraid to ask hard questions. You're not afraid to go to, scary, dark places physically and emotionally and spiritually. And so I think that that's kind of like your secret power and your reward is that you're able to translate to people through these pages like, hey,
I've tried it all.
yes, I've tried it all. I have done it. And the only thing
Yeah,
is
let me save you some heartache.
it is dangerous when you
Yeah.
get a hold of that. But then on the other side, you being the pen, holding the pen of this, it's all of a sudden that becomes your attack, right? Because I mean, anyone who writes anything, all of a sudden you're like now the target for whatever you're writing about. So it's
Yeah.
kind of probably this burden of like, okay, I wrote a book on dangerous hope, and today I'm not feeling hopeful. I am not feeling him. I'm not,
Yeah.
and it's
And
just an
I carried so much. I battled with God because I wrote the book like I wrote the book and completed it when it was done right when I found out that I was pregnant with River. So the book had kind of changed because I thought that it would end with just the adoption, and I wanted to publish that book. And God and friends and my agent and other authors were like, that is not the ending of your book. I did not want to include the pregnancy, so I finished writing the book before I even knew if I would have a baby at the end of
So
this.
did you not want to include it because you didn't want your life message to be like the end goal? I got it. Pregnancy. Like why didn't you?
Yes,
Okay.
I knew that not every woman with an infertility diagnosis
Would have your
will
story.
have my story.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to be a salesperson, like have all this hope and believe in Jesus and then you'll get everything you want. I
I know.
hated that story. I hated it. I also hate the story that if you adopt, you'll get pregnant. And I
Yes.
felt like that was the story God was giving me. And I was
Yeah.
like, if we are going to tell this story, which is
Yeah. You
the
don't want
true
to be the
story,
poster child for those
we are
things.
going to tell the truth. And the truth was pregnancy was hard. The truth was, and my life doesn't end, the story doesn't end with me like being sold out for Jesus. It is a story of me lamenting. It is a story of me truly wondering if God is good. And you feel that tension of like, this is the way that I was raised, and I believe that, but I also don't have evidence. I can't find the evidence in my life because the enemy was delivering me evidence that maybe God wasn't good. And you feel me being like, I have all these good things, but like inside I'm still dying. And where is the hope when things feel hopeless? Even though my story is like, I got the babies and
For sure. That honestly, Britt, that is so relatable because it's you're right. Like your story happens to have good in it, and it's exactly what you were quote unquote hoping for. But you're totally right. Where is the hope when it's hopeless? And for the reader who doesn't get what they want, because it's true. Just because you hope for something does not mean you're going to get it. Like that.
and
That
even when you get it, it doesn't, it sadly doesn't fulfill you
no.
unless your hope is in Jesus.
Right. Right. That's
Yeah.
the literally the promise that you are hoping for. And we love as a Western culture to quote the promise is whatever we're wanting, right? God promised me a baby. God promised me this job. God promised me like, and it's like, no, he promised that his presence would never leave you. He promised that he's always with you. He didn't like, I mean, I'm not saying that God does not promise these very specific things to people, but we like to use the word desire and change that word to promise. And that's
Yeah.
just the reality. And so the end, like what you're saying, the thesis is you can get all the things you desire, but at the end of the day, nothing will come close to the desire of him. And you feel that. And it's like, and he is jealous for the number one. He doesn't want to be number two or plan B. He wants to be, you know. But it's so, oh man, it's so like the Ann Voskamp quote of like every single crucifixion has a Gethsemane. And I always think that when I'm in a season of hard, I'm like, I am in the Gethsemane right now. And I do know, even if you've ever been to Israel in the Garden of Gethsemane, it's surrounded by olive trees. And I just think, okay, there is oil in my Gethsemane. And there is evidence that I can cry in Gethsemane because Jesus did. There's evidence that I can bleed in Gethsemane. I remember thinking during my loss, I almost translated as because Jesus left actual physical blood in Gethsemane and now I'm physically bleeding, that shows me that you can bleed and still like have hope to like, and it fuels you. And when you sometimes see suffering and like loss as a binder to him versus a wall, it is like your whole life transforms. And then that is when you have the lens of like, wow, my only hope is him, not the thing I want, you know? It just, oh my gosh, it's wild. So another thing I really don't want to forget in this episode is the part when I read your book. My favorite part is the part of your vision or dream or encounter. Even that language in Christian world is like, people will be like, what? Like they're loopy. But you had this experience with Jesus. And will you just tell that part for people who haven't read?
Yeah, absolutely. It's also my favorite part and one of
Oh,
the anchors of the book. Yeah, I changed agents multiple times because they wanted to take this part out, and I felt like there's
see, you're like,
no
when I
point of the book. um, yeah, so I had this vision, and so to give context, my grandma had passed away, and she was like a mom to me, and she helped raise me, and she had passed away before the miscarriages. So she's a part of this like horrible season of loss. And in the vision, I'm standing in a room, and there's nothing in the room, but there's a glass wall, and I can see on the other side. And on the other side is a man standing at a table. His back is to me, and he's working on something that I can't see. And so, it's been years that I'm in this room and I'm on the floor crying, lonely, sad, just desperate, hungry. And all of those feelings are what come with infertility. And so this man is working at this table, and I'm banging on the glass wall and trying to get his attention, and nothing happens for years. But the vision is complete the day that I met my daughter, and my grandma comes into focus on the other side of the glass wall, and she starts walking towards the man whose back is to me, and I see her smiling at whatever he's working on. And so then I get up from crying, and I'm trying to get their attention, and I'm waving to my grandma, and I'm just trying to get her to come over, and she doesn't. She points at what he's working on, and the man turns around, and there's tears in my eyes, and he's walking towards me with whatever he has, and I can't tell until he gets to me, and he places a baby in my arms, and he says, you'll have to read the book, but he says very specific words that I wrote down. And he basically says, good things take time, my darling. I was working on her, and I bottled up every tear, and I anointed your daughter. And it was just God telling me that while I assumed he was ignoring me and could not hear me or didn't care or was focused on whatever he was working on, he was actually doing exactly what I had asked.
Oh, what I love even, I remember reading it and thinking, I love the way this reoccurring, like dream was that his back was to you. And that it's just like there's so many metaphors in which like I feel like the Holy Spirit is like speaking to you, and that it literally ministers to me. I think of that vision all the time still. And it's just like, so let's just talk about that. Let's talk about when you have an encounter like that. Okay. What does that do for you? You just were handed your daughter. You've had this recurring dream, also just the grief and weight of losing someone deeply important to you. What does an encounter from the Lord, what is the purpose of that for you?
It was the first semblance of hope, real hope, not this false hope that I had been like dancing around with. The first semblance of hope that I had, and I'm sure anyone who's adopted knows this because I've just been given this baby that I'm told is not mine until papers are signed in 30 days and 60 days, and biological grandma could show up, and you're given this baby and you fall madly in love.
Right.
And then they're like, but we don't know, you have to wait. And so I held on to that vision, because I had not had that in any other experience. I held on to that vision, and I had hope in that vision that she was mine. But that's the real emotion that adoptive moms don't say they have, because they're so worried about
The fear of loss.
hurting, the fear
Yeah.
of loss, and what you're not allowed to say as an adoptive mom, because you're
Right.
trying, you're supposed to,
You want to advocate for
you want to advocate, and you want to believe in.
But what's scary is that is a different mask of the same fear for you. Essentially, that this child was going to be taken from you. And that was your kryptonite. That was your thing that
was my
broke
thing.
you.
Here's the I still wrestle with I have a 5 and a 3-year-old. These children are not mine. And that is the suckiest truth that has ever been delivered to me, because it feels like I can protect them best. And I am both humbled and terrified and thankful and angry that that's the truth, because I feel like I can do it best. And God says, you absolutely can't even do a fraction of what I can do to protect them. But I don't want to believe that. I want the control. I mean, clearly control is like a reoccurring sin stronghold in my life.
Dude, I am queen of struggling to control baby.
And it's just the truth, like that God delivered me this baby, that this baby came from not my womb and not my own doing, because I mean, we had tried to adopt, and it was just this phone call out of nowhere that she came to us. It's God being like, you will never forget that she is not yours.
Oh my gosh, Britt, that's so good. Because she's like this, kind of trophy of just like true grace in your life. You didn't deserve it and you didn't do it. Especially you and me. We are go-getters. We want something, we go do it. Like we've raised funds for nonprofits, for Pete's sake. We're not afraid to ask. But that's what's scary is a lot of things in my life. I'm like, oh my gosh, did I just strive this into existence, or was this truly the grace of God? And for you, it's like you couldn't have strived that in. That was the Lord. And the minute that you forget that He did it and not you, it's game over. And it's like, and it's so hard even on this side, you being 5 years later and a 3-year-old, and that it's like that's still the thing you'll always wrestle with is, yes, they're trophies of hope, but remember, that's not what it's in. That's just evidence of it, but that is not like you're not now done with having to fight for hope now that you have something that you were hoping for. It is an ongoing battle your whole life.
Yeah. Yeah, I call it my dance with the divine, because
oh yes,
it ends up being beautiful, but I try to lead. Like I try to tell God, and God is so good to me. Like I feel like He is always just stretching out His hand, saying like, I will dance with you. I know the steps. I will lead you. And I'm like stepping all over His feet. I don't even know what I'm doing half the time. And He never is harsh, and He's never anything but tender and loving and good.
yeah. So are there more books in you? Are you working on more books?
So I
Do
I
you feel
said
like
I
you're
was
like, I
done.
did it?
No, I said I was done. The process is so funny. Like I'm a writer. I will always be a writer. I will always write things. And I've told you this, the publishing world, I published post 2020 where I think everything changed. The publishing world really got to me in a lot of ways.
You want to be beat down, then publish a book with a freaking.
Yeah. And
Want to feel this big?
100%. And so there are absolutely more books in me. I don't know what route I will go. I don't know if I will sell. I'm an Enneagram 4. I just found out that my redemptive gift is a mercy. So I clearly just like to do things different. I think there's this part of me that's like, everyone wants to traditionally publish. So I'm going to do it the opposite way. But then I'm also like, is this just my issue where I have problems with control And in the
Yeah.
publishing world, you are surrendering so much control, and you're fighting for what
You're
you want
giving
in the
up the
book with
narrative.
people
Yeah.
that are professionals, and they
Yeah.
know. When you write a memoir, you know this. When you write a story that is yours, that you have lived, where the details, there's really no wiggle room. Like, this is just the truth of what happened and how I felt about it.
Yeah.
And then you have a team of people come in and they're like, but this is what will sell. You're like, I don't care. There is a weird tension with being an author and a writer and going
Yeah.
the traditional publishing route. And so I'm just letting God lead that. I have another book
Of
sitting in
course
my
you do.
Google
You
Docs.
are freaking superwoman. I don't know how you have time to write.
Well, I have two children and they're in
Yeah.
such a sweet stage right now. And you will feel this way. Once you write your book, once it's complete, you then have the field guide. It
Yeah.
feels so much easier now. I feel like it's like becoming a mom. It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
you know how to
Curve is
parent. There's really no like, your parenting style. And so what's five when you have four, like the
I feel
chaos
this.
is the chaos. That's
Yeah.
similar with writing a book. Like, I'm like, there's a season of life where it's going to be possible and not possible. There are seasons of life where writing a book is not possible.
And
And I
shouldn't be a
wish
priority.
more people said that. I feel like there's this thing in the published or in being a writer and a creative where it's like, if you don't write every single day for 4 hours a day, you're not a real writer. No, you're probably just a mom.
Yeah.
Like, or you have another job. And so there is another book in me. My father-in-law just passed away, and I was there
Oh,
for
Britt, I
his
didn't know
last
that.
breaths. And
Oh,
it was hard, but Evie, it was so holy. And there's this thing stirring in me that's like, you know what? We do not witness birth. We do not witness physiological births ever, and we do not witness death. And I think there's something wrong with our culture because of that, because we don't ever have the honor and the privilege and the burden of witnessing hard things.
yeah.
And so I don't know, there's something in me about that I'm like, I think
Powerful.
everyone needs to witness. I think
Yes.
we need to be there when people take their first and their last breaths, and
Honestly,
it
that's
does something to
powerful.
you.
Yeah, that's powerful.
We talk a lot about the breaths that we take in between, but like there's just so much in the first and the last. And so I don't know, we'll see.
Dang. Dang. Oh yeah, there's more books in you. Well, so to somebody who feels like they want to write, what would you say to them? Because you walk this out well. What would you say to the girl or the man that's listening that's like, I have a story and maybe I don't know where to start?
I think maybe Glennon Doyle Melton, I don't know her name. She's an author. I think she's
Glennon Doyle, yeah.
yeah, I think she's responsible for this quote, "Write from a scar,
Oh,
not a
that's Beth.
wound."
That's Beth. Well, I know Beth Moore says it,
Oh, does
but
she say it?
you
So many
may,
people say it. I don't know who's responsible for it, but
yeah, to find out.
whoever originated that, I
Yes,
believe
right.
that.
Yes,
What you
from a scar.
publish into the world, I think, write from a wound to God. I
Yeah.
write every single day in my journal, and that is definitely a bleeding wound.
Yes.
That feel, and I don't think we can write from a scar until we've written from a wound. So I would
Yeah.
like to stretch that out. I think we so often try to write something that's going to be on Instagram because we have all these platforms where we can put our words. We often try to write for the sake of publication, even if you're not like a published author, just in
Totally.
your blog or on
Yeah.
Facebook, before we've actually written our wound.
Healed. Yeah.
And you cannot heal without having first addressed. I just studied Lamentations and and even like the Psalms, all these books in the Bible where the authors are so messy. Like, David is like, I love you, Lord. Oh my gosh, you've abandoned me, within like 30 seconds,
Yeah.
and that has been so true of my writing.
Hmm.
And I have never found anything worthy of anyone else reading my words until I have first written like the ugly, messy, chaotic, looks like a third grader wrote it, where
Hmm.
I'm just like crying out to God or
Yeah.
praising God. And so I would say, if you want to be a writer, you need to do both, and you need
Yeah.
to know the difference. You have a diary and a journal. and then publish what can help someone else.
Yeah, that's so good. Just like literally prioritize wholeness and then be vulnerable with what you learned in the brokenness.
Yeah.
Oh, Britt, I feel like nobody stirs. Like every time we talk, I am like, all right, I am doing this. I believe in myself. Yeah, you are always like my 911 call of like, listen, I think I'm gonna give up. And you're like, oh, to heck you are, dude. Like,
Your book is going to come out in the perfect timing.
yes.
You literally can't rush the process.
Yeah, totally. Totally. It's so
And
true.
we're all just like on the edge of our seats waiting
Don't say
until that
that.
happens. I will say,
Oh, that's so good. Well, okay, so we can find you on Instagram. We can
Yeah.
buy your book. What's your website?
thedangeroushopebook.com or brittanyannross.com. You
Perfect.
can
Okay.
find it all at Instagram. That's like my main
Yes.
thing. It's Brit_Ross108.
Okay. And yeah, go buy her book, reach out to her, post when you read it. Oh my gosh, it's such a help to authors. And gosh, I'm just thankful for you.
I told you, Brittany's incredible. I'm just laughing because I'm like, isn't it just like the Lord that He would release this in this moment, and He knew that in my head it was quote unquote delayed, but it's perfect timing. And so wherever you find yourself as you're listening to this, I hope it found you in the perfect moment. If, like Brittany said, you can find her on Instagram. Make sure you buy her book. It's so powerful. Brittany, any day now, is due to give birth to her third baby. And so now I'm like, gosh, we need to get her back on the podcast for a little life update and all the new things that she's learned. But as always, you stayed in and listened to this conversation. I want to say thank you. If you have a second, please leave a comment, rate the show. And if something that Brittany spoke to you blesses you, please make sure you tag us. It really means a lot as creators when we see the, evidence of somebody being blessed by something that was said. And so until next time.